It was supposed to be symbolic, an international leadership forum in New York City, a glossy gathering of presidents, CEOs, and, important, people who were used to speaking more than listening. The guest list was carefully curated to favor Western allies and market-friendly voices. No one expected Ibrahim Traoré to attend. He wasn't invited. He showed up anyway. An African leader in his early 30s, dressed not in a Western-cut suit, but in a traditional dark green tunic with gold embroidery and the unmistakable calm of someone who'd walked through fire and learned to breathe smoke. Security hesitated at first, but Traoré walked past them without arrogance, only purpose. "You don't get to shape the world and then lock the door behind you," he said quietly. Inside the conference hall, Donald Trump had just finished delivering his keynote. Polished. Predictable. Praising American excellence and winning, as if the world were still watching through the lens of 2016. He was shaking hands, basking in applause, when the cameras cut to Traoré making his way down the aisle. The room shifted. Heads turned. Some in curiosity, others in discomfort. Trump squinted at the unfamiliar face. "Who's this guy?" he muttered to an aide. "That's Ibrahim Traoré, Mr. President. From Burkina Faso." Trump chuckled dismissively and raised his voice just loud enough for the room to hear. "You're not in my league, kid." There it was, dismissal served with a grin. The kind that had worked for Trump for decades. The kind that used to shut rooms down. But Traoré didn't blink. He stopped, turned slowly toward Trump, and spoke with a steady voice that didn't seek applause, but still silenced the room. "You built a rigged one. No yelling. No finger-pointing. Just truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be shouted to hit harder than a punch." The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was recalibration. Because in that moment, the room remembered something America had forgotten. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it just walks in uninvited and rewrites the rules. The echo of Traoré's calm yet cutting reply hadn't even faded when the moderators scrambled to regain control of the room. Trump smirked, waved a dismissive hand, and leaned into the mic with a chuckle. "Relax, everyone. He's just emotional. Young guy. Lots of passion. Not a lot of experience." Laughter trickled from a few loyal donors in the front row. But it felt forced. Uneven. Offbeat. Like clapping out of rhythm at a funeral. Traoré didn't respond right away. He simply walked to the edge of the stage, not toward Trump, but toward the audience. He looked directly at them, not as adversaries, but as witnesses. "Experience," he said. "I've buried friends before I turned 30. I've seen children sleep to the sound of drones labeled peacekeeping. And I've led a country not because I wanted to, because I had to." The room was quiet again. Not shocked. Listening. If that doesn't qualify me to speak in this room, then maybe this room isn't built for truth, only comfort. Trump shifted in his seat. For a man who thrived on being the most dominant presence, Traoré's refusal to play the game unnerved him. He leaned back toward the mic, this time sharper. "Well, if you knew anything about building, you'd know comfort means strength. That's what we've done for the world. That's what we bring, order." Traoré smiled for the first time. Not with arrogance. With clarity. "No, Mr. Trump. You bring compliance. You bring silence. You bring chairs arranged in circles where voices like mine are expected to clap, not speak." The moderator coughed, signaling to cut the session short. The schedule was falling apart. But the cameras stayed locked in. Traoré didn't need permission to speak. And Trump couldn't figure out why the room no longer belonged to him. Because for the first time, a stage he once ruled had rules he couldn't change. The next session was supposed to pivot to economic recovery. But the air still hummed with what had just happened. Organizers tried to reset with a panel of global investors and ex-presidents. Trump was scheduled to appear again, this time for a fireside chat. But the audience didn't lean forward like they used to. Their eyes kept darting, not toward the stage, but toward Traoré, now seated quietly off to the side, sipping water, utterly unfazed. An anchor from a major U.S. network whispered to her producer. "We need to get that guy on camera, now." Backstage, Trump fumed. Why is everyone acting like he's some kind of prophet? He's a nobody. His aide hesitated. "Sir, the social feeds are flooding. His clips hit 12 million views in 2 hours." Trump's face tightened. That's when it was announced, Traoré would join the panel discussion after all. A last-minute shift. Not scheduled. Not expected. But now, necessary. The moderator welcomed the guests, trying to appear relaxed. "We're honored to have President Donald Trump and Captain Ibrahim Traoré for this discussion on global economic justice." The phrase, economic justice, made Trump roll his eyes visibly. He leaned into the mic. Justice doesn't come from complaining. It comes from winning. You make deals. You build. You don't beg. Without missing a beat, Traoré responded. "You're confusing justice with access. You built systems that lock the door, then hand out favors to whoever kneels first." The audience shifted again, some smiled, others stiffened. Trump snorted. "So what's your grand solution? Tear it all down?" Traoré turned slowly to face him. "Not all of it. Just the part that demands silence in exchange for survival." The moderator froze. This wasn't a conversation anymore, it was a dissection. And for the first time in years, Trump realized he wasn't debating someone trying to rise in his league. He was facing someone who never needed it. Trump leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he attempted to reassert control, not just over the conversation, but the entire room. "Look," he said, his tone sharper now, "you talk a big game about fairness. But America's the reason half this world functions. We fund the systems, we protect the peace, we take the risks." He paused for applause. Only a few scattered claps responded. Traoré didn't even blink. "No, Mr. Trump," he said evenly. "You fund the winners of the systems you built. You protect your investments, not peace. And the only risks you take are when someone like me walks into your rooms without asking." Gasps rippled from the press gallery. Trump jabbed back. "We built this league. Without us, there's no progress. There's no global order." Traoré stood slowly, the movement unhurried, controlled, like a blade being unsheathed. "Then maybe it's time we stop playing in leagues that were designed to keep us at the bottom." The moderator tried to interject, voice rising. "Gentlemen, let's please keep the focus on collaboration." But it was too late. The audience wasn't watching a panel anymore. They were watching an unraveling. Traoré stepped closer, now face to face with Trump. "You see failure when others stop obeying. I see liberation when they finally speak." Trump's nostrils flared. "You talk like a rebel. But rebels don't run nations." Traoré leaned in, voice low, precise. "Rebels don't ask permission. That's why they win." It wasn't a yell. It wasn't even a challenge. It was an observation. One so quiet it thundered louder than Trump's entire speech. And in that moment, the illusion that Trump's league was untouchable began to fracture. The next morning, headlines didn't just cover the summit, they revolved around one exchange. Trump dismisses African leader. Traoré fires back. From obscurity to spotlight, who is Ibrahim Traoré? He wasn't on the guest list. Now he owns the room. Trump's camp was furious. His team scrambled to do damage control, claiming the comments were taken out of context and a moment of humor misunderstood by the media. But the damage had already rippled far beyond the walls of the forum. Social media was ablaze. Clips of Traoré's quiet defiance played on loop, reaching millions who'd never even heard of Burkina Faso before. But they didn't need a geography lesson, they understood power when they saw it. "He speaks like someone who doesn't owe them anything," one user posted. "Trump finally met someone who didn't need to beat him, just outlast him," another replied. By noon, Traoré was invited to an unscheduled roundtable, this time with independent economists, professors, and youth leaders. Trump wasn't invited. When asked what it meant to challenge American leadership, Traoré's answer was simple. "I'm not here to challenge America. I'm here to challenge the idea that only one voice should matter." Meanwhile, in a private lounge, Trump paced. "He'll be forgotten in a week," he growled to an aide. But even Trump wasn't fully convinced. The truth was, he'd played this game before: media cycles, control optics, manufactured dominance. But Traoré wasn't playing the same game. He wasn't trying to win the crowd. He was changing the crowd. And perhaps for the first time in Trump's career. The stage wasn't his to walk off from. 3 days later, Trump hosted a private event at the Midtown Republican Club. The room was full of donors, strategists, and former officials eager to see him regain footing. Cameras were barred. Chatter filled the air. But underneath it all, something had shifted. Trump stood before the podium, loosening his tie slightly. "I know what you've heard," he began. "But don't get distracted. That kid, he got his 5 minutes. It's done." A few laughed. Others nodded politely. But Trump noticed the hesitation in their claps. He noticed their glances toward their phones. He noticed that no one was quoting him anymore. Meanwhile, across the city, Ibrahim Traoré had been invited to Columbia University to speak to a packed auditorium. Professors who once ignored African geopolitics now waited in line for quotes. Student leaders, black, brown, white, sat cross-legged on the floor, recording every word. "When power becomes a mirror, it collapses under its own reflection," Traoré said. "When it becomes a window, others begin to see their place inside it." He wasn't lecturing. He was narrating. The world doesn't need more dominance. It needs space. Meanwhile, back at the club, a donor approached Trump privately. "Mr. President, with respect, he's becoming something else. He's not attacking us, he's inspiring them." Trump sneered. "He's a phase." But even as he said it, he knew that phases don't make presidents nervous. Movements do. And Traoré wasn't trending anymore. He was being followed. By the following week, the forum footage had been dissected in every major media outlet. Analysts argued over whether Traoré had overstepped or simply told a truth long whispered in quiet corridors. But one thing became clear: Trump was no longer the only gravity in the room. A conservative commentator on live TV tried to downplay it. "It's cute, sure." He made a moment. "But real power? That's still in American hands." Seconds later, a fact-check graphic flashed on the screen. Since Traoré's comments, 3 West African nations halted talks with U.S. contractors. 2 announced local currency coalitions. 4 regional youth organizations publicly endorsed his message. Traoré hadn't just spoken. He'd sparked motion. And motion, once begun, doesn't always ask permission. Meanwhile, Trump's team flooded social media with throwback speeches, vintage slogans, even clips of past UN performances where he'd dominated the room. But the views weren't matching Traoré's quiet monologue from the summit. Why? Because strength no longer looked like shouting. And somewhere deep inside, Trump knew it. He scheduled an impromptu press conference and addressed the growing conversation. "I built towers. I built brands. I even built a presidency. And I'm not about to let some foreign soldier rewrite how power works." He paused for effect. Then came the question that cut the air. Mr. Trump, if you built it, why are people choosing to leave it? The silence was cold. Not angry. Just, truthful. Trump dodged the question, but the cameras didn't forget. And outside, on the sidewalk, a protester held a sign. You built the league. But we never agreed to the game. Inside the building, Trump looked smaller than he had in years. Back in Washington, Trump's advisors urged him to pivot the narrative. They suggested interviews with sympathetic outlets, scripted town halls, anything to restore his command of the media cycle. But something strange had happened. The more Trump spoke, the more the spotlight dimmed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Traoré's name was rising, not as a headline, but as a signal. He wasn't trending like a celebrity. He was circulating like an idea. In student unions in Nairobi, protests in Dakar, podcasts in Detroit, forums in Sao Paulo. They weren't quoting his biography. They were echoing his words. If your leadership requires silence, it's not leadership. It's theater. Trump saw the quote trending. He slammed his phone down. He's turning this into a movement, he muttered. His press secretary responded too quickly. It's just a moment. He's not running for office here. Trump's glare said what he didn't need to. He doesn't have to. That night, at a private fundraiser, a Wall Street executive pulled Trump aside. You know what's scary about that kid, he whispered. He's not trying to win over America. He's trying to expose it. Trump's smile tightened. Let him try. He'll find out why leagues exist in the first place. But even he could hear the insecurity beneath his bravado. Because deep down, Trump understood something the others didn't want to admit. You can't outplay someone who stopped playing your game. And for the first time in decades, Trump felt what he hadn't felt since before his first campaign. Irrelevance knocking. 2 weeks after the summit, Trump finally returned to the stage, this time in Texas, flanked by flags, veteran endorsements, and chants rehearsed like a Broadway show. The crowd clapped, but something felt thinner than usual. The rhythm was there, but not the electricity. He opened with his usual flair. We don't apologize for winning. We don't step aside for nobodies. We built the league. We lead the world. But behind the stage, his staff watched their phones anxiously. At that very moment, Traoré was live streaming from Ouagadougou. No fanfare. No flags. Just a concrete rooftop, dusk behind him, wind ruffling the mic. Power that fears questions isn't power, it's performance, he said. And we're done clapping for actors pretending to be leaders. The comments poured in. Not just from Africa. From Europe. From the Middle East. From forgotten cities in America itself. Say it again. He's not talking about just them, he's talking about us. Finally. Someone said it. Trump wrapped his Texas speech with a wink and a dig. Let's not get distracted by foreign lectures, folks. We're the ones with the scoreboard. But there were no viral clips the next day. No hashtags. No shift in global tone. Meanwhile, a reporter asked Traoré during a Q&A. Do you consider yourself part of the global order? He didn't hesitate. No. I consider myself part of the global awakening. And that was it. That was the sentence. The one that didn't require applause. Because it already belonged to a crowd that didn't need to be convinced. The following month, a prestigious think tank released a report titled The Shifting Voice of Global South, From Obedience to Ownership. And its cover didn't feature the usual faces of European diplomacy or American presidents. It featured a still image of Traoré, standing alone at the summit, face calm, chin lifted, hands empty, but in control. Inside, the report quoted him more than any other leader from the conference. Not for his rank. Not for his military record. But for his refusal to play the game. In contrast, Trump's name appeared only once, in a footnote about rhetorical backlash. The silence from Trump's camp grew. No more snide remarks. No more live interviews. Just occasional reposts of old speeches and filtered photos from rallies where the crowd was shrinking, not roaring. He had underestimated the moment. Because the real shift hadn't happened on a debate stage or under spotlights. It had happened quietly. In classrooms. In WhatsApp threads. In oil fields and mining towns. In villages where power used to mean waiting for orders, and now meant asking different questions. What if we don't need their league? What if we stop apologizing for standing? What if Traoré was right? The old league, the one Trump had tried to gatekeep, didn't shatter all at once. But it started to look irrelevant. And Traoré? He didn't gloat. He didn't hold press conferences about his victory. He returned to work. He met with farmers. He signed deals on his terms. He walked without entourage. Because that was the final lesson. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest. And sometimes, the man who built the game is the first one benched when the players change. In a world built on appearances and applause, Ibrahim Traoré reminded us of something deeper, something older than politics, older than titles. Dignity. He didn't shout. He didn't boast. He simply stood, unshaken, unapologetic, and unwilling to play by the rules of a rigged game. Trump tried to dismiss him as a nobody. But Traoré didn't flinch. Because true power doesn't need permission. This wasn't about winning a debate. It was about changing the terms of one. And while one man clung to a league he built for himself, another man stood for a world ready to outgrow it. So ask yourself, whose voice really echoed when the cameras turned off? And whose silence did the world start listening to?